Have you ever wanted to speak English fluently, but felt too scared to try? Does your mind go blank when you start a conversation in English? I used to feel the same way. Speaking English seemed like an impossible mountain to climb until I discovered some simple techniques that changed everything. This is my story of how I went from being terrified of speaking English to confidently talking with anyone, anywhere. And guess what? You could do it too. Stick with me till the end, and I'll show you how talking in English is so easy. My name is Thompson, and for as long as I can remember, I have struggled with speaking English. It wasn't that I didn't understand the language. I had studied English in school for years. I knew the grammar rules, and I could read and write well. I had memorized long lists of vocabulary words, written essays, and even passed my English exams with good marks. But when it came to actually speaking, everything was different. Every time I opened my mouth to say something in English, my tongue felt heavy, like it was tied in a knot. My mind would suddenly go blank, as if all the words I had learned had disappeared. My heart would start beating faster, and my hands would get sweaty. It was like my whole body was telling me, "Stop, don't speak." I remember one time in class when my teacher asked me to read a paragraph aloud. My heart pounded as I stood up. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. As I began to read, my voice shook. I stumbled over simple words that I knew well. My classmates started whispering, and I thought they were laughing at me. I felt embarrassed and sat down as quickly as possible. That experience made my fear even worse. I started avoiding situations where I had to speak English. If a teacher asked a question in class, I looked down, hoping they wouldn't call on me. If someone spoke to me in English, I replied in the shortest way possible, using just one or two words. If I had to introduce myself, I would feel nervous and hope someone else would speak first. I convinced myself that speaking English was the hardest thing in the world, and I believed I would never be able to do it. One of the biggest reasons I was afraid to speak English was that I didn't want to make mistakes. I thought that if I made a mistake, people would laugh at me or think that I wasn't smart. I had heard fluent English speakers talk so smoothly and confidently, and I wished I could do the same. But whenever I tried, I would get stuck. I would think too much about the correct grammar or the right pronunciation, and by the time I figured out what to say, the moment had already passed. There were times when I wanted to speak, but my fear held me back. I remember once at a family gathering, my cousin, who had studied in an English-speaking country, started talking to me in English. "Hey Lily, how's school going?" he asked. I panicked. I knew the answer in my head, but my mouth refused to move. I just smiled and said, "Good." He waited for me to say more, but I didn't. After a few seconds of silence, he switched back to our native language, and I felt relieved. But deep inside, I felt disappointed in myself. Why couldn't I just speak? Why was it so difficult? I started believing that some people were just naturally good at speaking English, and that I was not one of them. Because of my fear, I tried to avoid speaking English as much as possible. If I was in a group and someone started talking in English, I would stay quiet. If I had to give a presentation in class, I would practice writing it many times, but when I stood in front of the class, my voice would be barely audible, and I would rush through it. Even when I traveled to places where English was spoken, I avoided using it. One time, I went to a restaurant where the menu was in English. I wanted to order a burger, but I was too nervous to say it in English. Instead of speaking, I pointed at the menu and nodded when the waiter asked if that was my order. I felt frustrated. I wanted to be able to speak freely like others, but something was stopping me. I didn't know how to overcome my fear. I had accepted that this was just who I was, someone who would never be able to speak English confidently. But then, one day, everything changed. It happened on a regular school day. My English teacher, Mr. Reynolds, walked into the classroom and wrote something on the board. Speaking English is not about being perfect. It's about being brave. He turned to us and said, "Many students think they can't speak English because they make mistakes. But let me tell you something. Mistakes are part of learning." He looked around the classroom, and his eyes met mine. "Lily," he said, "do you believe that speaking English is difficult?" I nodded slowly. "Do you know why?" he asked. "It's because you are afraid of making mistakes. But what if I told you that making mistakes is the best way to learn?" I had never thought of it that way. I had always seen mistakes as something bad. But he was telling me that mistakes could actually help me. Then he gave us a challenge. For the next week, he said, "I want all of you to speak English as much as possible. Even if you make mistakes, don't stop. Just keep talking. Can you do that?" I wasn't sure if I could, but something inside me wanted to try. That day marked the beginning of a journey that would change my life forever. It was a bright and sunny morning. The school bell had just rung, signaling the beginning of the first period. I walked into my classroom, feeling the usual mix of excitement and nervousness that came with a new school day. The walls were covered with colorful charts, and the big blackboard at the front of the room had a neatly written date on it. As I settled into my seat, I noticed that my English teacher, Mr. Reynolds, had a different kind of energy that morning. He was smiling warmly, his eyes twinkling as if he had something exciting planned for us. I looked around at my classmates, who were chatting among themselves, unaware of what was about to happen. Mr. Reynolds clapped his hands together to get our attention. "Good morning, everyone," he said cheerfully. "Good morning, sir," we all replied in unison. He picked up a piece of chalk and wrote on the board in big letters, "Let's speak English." I felt my stomach tighten. Speaking English? In front of the whole class? I swallowed hard. This was not going to be easy. Mr. Reynolds turned to face us, still smiling. "Today," he announced, "we are going to do a very simple and fun speaking activity." Fun? I wasn't so sure about that. "We will all introduce ourselves in English," he continued. "Just say your name, your favorite hobby, and one dream you have for the future. Nothing too difficult." I could already feel my heart pounding. I had always struggled with speaking English. I knew the words, I knew the grammar, and I could even write in English. But speaking? That was a completely different story. Whenever I tried to speak, my tongue felt heavy, and my mind went blank. Mr. Reynolds looked around the room. "Let's start from the first row," he said. I let out a breath of relief. I was sitting in the last row, which meant I had some time before my turn. The first student stood up and spoke confidently. "My name is Sarah. My favorite hobby is painting, and I want to become an artist in the future." The class clapped. One by one, my classmates introduced themselves. Some spoke fluently, others hesitated, but they all managed to complete their introductions. With every passing turn, my anxiety grew. I could feel my turn approaching like a storm, getting closer and closer. My hands became clammy, my throat dry. I tried to think of the words I would say, but my brain refused to cooperate. Finally, it was my turn. I stood up slowly, feeling like all eyes were on me. My knees felt weak and my palms were sweaty. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My classmates waited patiently. My name is, I stammered. My voice was barely a whisper. I could feel my face turning red with embarrassment. My heart was racing so fast that I thought it might burst out of my chest. I wanted to disappear, to sink into my chair and never be seen again. Just then, I heard a calm and reassuring voice. "Lily, don't worry about being perfect," Mr. Reynolds said gently. "Just talk. Mistakes are part of learning." I looked at him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't disappointed. He was smiling. His words felt like a warm hug, giving me the courage I needed. I took a deep breath and tried again. My name is Lily," I said slowly. "My favorite hobby is reading, and my dream is to travel the world." The class clapped. It wasn't perfect, but I had done it. I had spoken in English in front of everyone. I sat down, my heart still racing, but this time it wasn't out of fear, it was out of pride. After class, when everyone else had left, Mr. Reynolds called me over to his desk. "Lily," he said kindly, "do you want to speak English easily?" "Of course," I replied instantly. That was what I had always wanted. "Then let me tell you a secret," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Speaking English is not about knowing every word. It's about confidence, practice, and fun." I frowned. Confidence? Fun? How could speaking English be fun? Seeing my confusion, he smiled. "Trust me," he said. "Follow these simple techniques, and soon you'll be speaking like a pro." I looked at him, feeling a new sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could finally learn to speak English without fear. And that was the moment my journey to confident English speaking began. The 5 golden techniques that changed my life. Mr. Reynolds was not just my English teacher. He became my guide, my mentor, and the person who showed me that speaking English was not difficult. It was fun. One day, after I had struggled to speak in class, he sat me down and shared 5 golden techniques that completely changed my life. At first, I was doubtful. Could these simple steps really help me speak English fluently? But I trusted him, and I decided to follow his advice. To my surprise, these techniques worked like magic. Let me share them with you so that you, too, can speak English with confidence. 1. Think in English. Train your brain. One afternoon, Mr. Reynolds looked at me and said, "Lily, do you know the biggest reason you struggle to speak English?" I shook my head. He smiled and explained, "It's because you think in your native language first and then translate into English. That takes time and makes speaking harder. If you want to speak faster and more naturally, you have to start thinking directly in English." I had never thought about this before. I had always translated my thoughts before speaking, which made me slow and nervous. Mr. Reynolds told me to train my brain by thinking in English all the time. At first, it was really difficult. My mind kept switching back to my native language. But I started with simple things. For example, if I was thirsty, instead of thinking, "I need water" in my own language and then translating it, I forced myself to think, "I need water" in English. If I saw a bird, I said to myself, "That is a beautiful bird." If I was hungry, I thought, "I want to eat some food." At first, I had to remind myself again and again. But after a few weeks, it became easier. Without realizing it, I started forming full sentences in my head. My brain was slowly adapting to English. And guess what? Thinking in English made speaking English much easier. 2. Speak every day, even when you're alone. One day, I asked Mr. Reynolds, "Sir, how can I practice speaking English when I have no one to talk to?" He chuckled and said, "Talk to yourself." I stared at him in surprise. Talk to myself? Wouldn't that be weird? But he explained, speaking is a skill just like riding a bicycle. The more you practice, the better you get. And you don't always need a partner to practice. You can practice by talking to yourself. That evening, I decided to try it. I stood in front of my mirror, looked at my reflection, and said, "Hello, my name is Lily. I am a student. Today, I will go to school and learn English." It felt strange at first, but I kept going. The next day, I spoke about my plans. Today, I have an English test. I hope I do well. Soon, I started speaking out loud while doing daily activities. While cooking, I would say, "I am making breakfast. I am frying eggs." While walking, I would say, "The sun is shining. The trees are green." I even started talking to myself before bedtime. Tomorrow is a new day. I will do my best. The more I spoke, the more confident I became. My fear of speaking slowly disappeared. I realized that I didn't need to wait for someone to talk to me. I could practice on my own. 3. Listen more, speak better. One day, Mr. Reynolds asked me, "Lily, do you know how babies learn to speak?" I thought for a moment and replied, "They listen first." He smiled. "Exactly. Before they say their first word, babies listen to their parents talk for months. Listening helps them learn pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. If you want to speak better, you have to listen more." From that day on, I made listening to English a part of my daily routine. I started listening to English songs and tried to sing along. I watched English cartoons with subtitles so I could read and listen at the same time. I listened to short English stories on YouTube and repeated the sentences. At first, it was hard to understand everything, but I didn't give up. Slowly, I started recognizing words and phrases. I noticed how native speakers pronounced words and how they connected sentences. The best part? The more I listened, the better I spoke. I started using new words in my conversations without even thinking about them. 4. Don't be afraid of mistakes. They help you learn. One of my biggest fears was making mistakes. I thought that if I said something wrong, people would laugh at me. But one day, something happened that changed my thinking forever. I was at a restaurant and I wanted to order a burger. I nervously walked to the counter and said, "Can I have a burger?" The cashier smiled and gently corrected me. "Can I have a burger?" I blushed with embarrassment, but then I remembered Mr. Reynolds' words. Nobody speaks perfectly at first. Even native speakers make mistakes. Mistakes are proof that you are learning. Instead of feeling ashamed, I smiled and repeated, "Can I have a burgers?" That day, I realized that making mistakes was not a bad thing. It was a natural part of learning. The more mistakes I made, the more I learned. From that moment, I stopped being afraid. Whenever I made a mistake, I laughed, corrected myself, and moved on. And guess what? My English improved faster than ever. 5. Join a speaking group, practice with others. The final step was the most exciting one. Mr. Reynolds suggested that I join an English conversation group. At first, I was scared. I worried that I would make mistakes, that my classmates would laugh at me, and that I wouldn't understand everything. But I pushed myself to go. At the meeting, I saw students from different countries all practicing English. Some were fluent, while others struggled just like me. But the best part? Nobody judged anyone. We played fun games like 20 questions, where one person thought of an object and others had to guess it by asking questions in English. We acted out funny dialogues, pretending to order food, book a hotel, or introduce ourselves to new friends. The more I spoke with others, the more confident I became. I stopped worrying about mistakes. I started enjoying English. Within a few months, I noticed a huge change. I was speaking faster, using better words, and understanding conversations more easily. It was a bright and sunny afternoon, and the school was buzzing with excitement. The bell had just rung for the lunch break, and students were scattered across the schoolyard, chatting, playing, and enjoying their time. I was standing near the main gate with my friends, laughing and talking about our favorite books when suddenly I noticed something unusual. A tall man, wearing a blue backpack and holding a map, stood near the school entrance. His forehead was wrinkled in confusion as he glanced around, as if searching for something. He looked different from most people in our town. His skin was lighter, and his hair was golden brown. He was a foreigner. "Who is he?" my friend Emma whispered. "I don't know," said Jacob, "but he looks lost." We watched as the man hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked towards a group of older students. He spoke to them, but they only exchanged nervous glances and shook their heads. He tried again with another group, but they backed away, whispering to each other. "What's happening?" I asked. "I think he's speaking English," Emma said, "and no one knows how to answer." My heart started pounding. A real English-speaking tourist. This was my chance. But doubt crept into my mind. What if I make a mistake? What if he doesn't understand me? What if I say something wrong and he laughs at me? I clenched my fists. No. I had spent so much time practicing English. This was the perfect moment to prove to myself that I could do it. Summoning all my courage, I took a deep breath and stepped forward, facing my fear. As I approached the man, he looked relieved. "Excuse me," he said politely. "How can I get to the library?" His voice was calm and clear, and I could understand every word. But still my heart raced. This was real. I wasn't practicing in front of a mirror. I wasn't repeating after a teacher. This was an actual conversation in English. For a split second, fear gripped me. My classmates were watching. If I messed up, they would hear everything. But then, I remember my teacher's advice. Speaking English is not about being perfect. It's about communication. I took another deep breath, steadied my voice, and answered, "You go straight, then turn left. The library is near the coffee shop." As soon as the words left my mouth, I froze. Did I say it correctly? Did he understand? The man looked at me for a moment, and then, to my surprise, he smiled. "Thank you," he said cheerfully. A wave of relief washed over me. He understood me. I had spoken in English, and it had worked. "You're welcome," I replied, feeling a new sense of confidence surge within me. A new beginning. As the tourist walked away, I turned around to see my classmates staring at me in amazement. "Wow, Lily, you actually talked to him," Emma gasped. "And he understood you," Jacob added. I felt my face turn red, but inside, I was glowing with happiness. I had done it. I had spoken to a native English speaker without hesitation. At that moment, something changed inside me. The fear that had always held me back was gone. I no longer saw English as a scary subject. It was no longer just something in textbooks and exams. English was a real language, meant for real conversations. I realized that speaking English was not as hard as I had always imagined. The only thing stopping me before was my own fear. From that day on, I stopped doubting myself. Whenever I got a chance to speak English, I took it. I spoke with confidence, without worrying about small mistakes. And the more I practiced, the easier it became. That simple conversation with a tourist had changed my life forever. English was no longer something to fear. It was something to enjoy. As my English improved, I started noticing something interesting. My friends, who had always seemed confident in class, were actually struggling with the same fears I once had. One day, during our lunch break, I heard my friend Emma sigh deeply while staring at her English textbook. "What's wrong, Emma?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. I just, I can't speak English properly. I know the words, but when I try to talk, nothing comes out right. I feel so embarrassed. I smiled because I knew exactly how she felt. "Emma, I used to feel the same way. But guess what? I learned some amazing techniques that made speaking English so much easier. Want me to show you?" Emma's eyes lit up. "Really? Will it help me?" I nodded confidently. "Of course. If they help me, they will definitely help you too." Sharing Mr. Reynolds' techniques. That afternoon, I gathered a small group of friends who also wanted to improve their English. There was Emma, who loved reading but was too shy to speak. Then there was Daniel, who had a great vocabulary but always second-guessed himself. And finally, Sophie, who understood English well but was too afraid of making mistakes. I told them everything I had learned from Mr. Reynolds, and we began practicing together. 1. Talking to yourself in English. I told my friends about the first technique, talking to themselves in English. Talking to yourself? Sophie laughed. "That sounds silly." I laughed too. I know it feels weird at first, but trust me, it works. Just try saying simple things like, "I am going to school," or "I am eating an apple." The more you talk, the more natural English will feel. Emma decided to try it right away. She looked at her lunch and said, "I am eating a sandwich." I clapped. "That's perfect. See? It's easy." Soon we all started speaking in English, even when we were alone. 2. Listening more to speak better. I told them about the second technique, listening to English every day. You don't need a teacher all the time, I explained. Just listen to English songs, watch movies with subtitles, or listen to English podcasts. Daniel, who loved music, got excited. "So if I listen to English songs, it will help me speak better?" "Yes," I said. "Try to sing along and repeat the words. That way, you'll learn new words and get used to how they sound." The next day, Daniel came running to me. "Lily, I listened to an English song and repeated the lyrics. And guess what? I learned 3 new words." "That's amazing," I said. "Now use those words in a sentence." He thought for a moment and then said, "The sun is shining brightly." "That's perfect." I cheered. 3. Joining a speaking group. The third technique was about practicing with real people. "We should make our own English-speaking group," I suggested. "Let's meet every day after school and only speak in English." At first, everyone was nervous. "What if we make mistakes?" Sophie asked. I smiled. "Mistakes are okay. That's how we learn." So, we started small. Every day, we would meet in the park and talk about simple things. Our favorite foods, our pets, what we did that day. The more we talked, the more confident we became. One day, Emma surprised us all. She had been the shyest in the group, but now she stood up and said, "Today, I want to talk about my dream. I want to travel to America and speak English fluently." We all clapped. She was no longer afraid to speak. Realizing my new goal, seeing my friends improve made me feel something special. It wasn't just about my own journey anymore. I wanted to help others speak English too. So, I decided to help even more students. I asked Mr. Reynolds if I could organize a small speaking club at school. He loved the idea. Soon, more students joined, and our group grew. We played speaking games, acted out fun dialogues, and even gave small speeches. One day, Sophie, the girl who was once afraid of making mistakes, stood in front of the whole group and said, "Speaking English is easy if you just try." I smiled, knowing that I had helped her find confidence. From that moment, I knew my purpose. I didn't just want to speak English. I wanted to help others speak it too. And that was the most rewarding feeling in the world. 1 year had passed since I started my journey of learning to speak English fluently. During this time, I had practiced speaking every day, listened to English conversations, and even started thinking in English. I had grown more confident, and I no longer feared making mistakes. But even though I had improved so much, I never imagined that I would have to stand in front of a large audience and give a speech in English. One afternoon, while I was in English class, Mr. Reynolds, my kind and encouraging English teacher, called me to his desk. His eyes twinkled with excitement as he said, "Lily, I have an important opportunity for you." I was curious. "What is it, sir?" I asked. "Next week, we are having a school event, and I would like you to give a short speech in English," he said with a big smile. My heart skipped a beat. A speech? In front of everyone? The thought of standing on a stage, with hundreds of eyes looking at me, made me nervous. A year ago, I would have found an excuse to avoid it. I would have shaken my head and said, "No, sir, I can't do it." But this time, something inside me felt different. I had come so far. I had spoken in English with my classmates, practiced with my friends, and even given small presentations in class. Maybe, just maybe, I was ready for this challenge. I took a deep breath, looked Mr. Reynolds in the eyes, and smiled. "Yes, I'd love to." Preparing for the speech. As soon as I accepted the challenge, I knew I had a lot of work to do. I couldn't just walk onto the stage and start talking. I needed to plan, practice, and make sure I deliver my speech with confidence. That evening, I sat at my study table and thought about what I wanted to say. I picked up my notebook and wrote down my ideas. I wanted my speech to inspire others who were afraid of speaking in English. After all, I had been one of those students who used to feel nervous while speaking. After many drafts and corrections, I finally completed my speech. It was simple, clear, and full of the lessons I had learned over the past year. The next step was practicing. I stood in front of my mirror and read my speech out loud. At first, my voice trembled, and I kept forgetting my words. But I didn't give up. Every morning before going to school, I practiced my speech. I spoke slowly and clearly, making sure to pronounce each word correctly. I imagined myself on stage, looking at the audience with confidence. At school, I asked my friends to listen to my speech and give me feedback. They cheered me on and said I was doing great. Mr. Reynolds also listened to my speech and said, "Lily, you are ready." Still, a small part of me felt nervous. What if I forgot my words? What if I made a mistake in front of the whole school? But then I remembered something Mr. Reynolds had told me many times. Mistakes are okay. Just speak with confidence. With this thought in mind, I continued practicing. I knew that if I gave my best effort, everything would be fine. The big day arrives. Finally, the day of the school event arrived. The auditorium was filled with students, teachers, and parents. Everyone was excited. The stage had bright lights, and there was a microphone standing in the center. The principal gave a welcome speech, and then the event began. I sat in the front row, waiting for my turn. My hands were cold, and my heart was beating fast. I took deep breaths to calm myself down. "Lily Thompson, please come to the stage for her speech," the announcer said. It was time. I stood up, straightened my dress, and walked to the stage. My legs felt a little shaky, but I reminded myself, I have practiced for this. I am ready. As I reached the microphone, I looked at the audience. Hundreds of faces were looking at me. I took one last deep breath and began delivering my speech. "Hello, everyone. My name is Lily, and today I want to tell you that talking in English is so easy." The audience clapped, and I felt a wave of confidence rush through me. I continued. "1 year ago, I was afraid to speak in English. I used to feel nervous. I worried about making mistakes. But I learned that English speaking is not about being perfect. It is about confidence, practice, and fun." As I spoke, I saw people nodding and smiling. My nervousness slowly disappeared. I spoke clearly, just as I had practiced. I shared my journey, my struggles, and how I overcame my fear. "If I can do it, so can you," I said with a bright smile. I finished my speech and looked at the audience. For a moment, there was silence. Then suddenly, the whole auditorium burst into loud applause. The moment of triumph. I couldn't believe it. My classmates were clapping, my teachers were smiling, and even the principal was nodding in approval. I had done it. I had given a speech in front of the whole school, and I had spoken in English with confidence. As I walked back to my seat, my friends high-fived me. Mr. Reynolds patted my back and said, "Lily, you were amazing." I felt so proud of myself. I had faced my biggest fear and won. That day, I learned a very important lesson. Speaking English is not scary. It is easy if you believe in yourself. Speaking English is easy if you believe in yourself. Don't worry about mistakes. Practice daily and have fun with it. If you enjoyed my journey, like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Also, subscribe to our channel, English Tone, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Let's make English easy together.